think we should go into that detail, which is like asking the question, like, why do we put ourselves in that position to not take these breaks, all grind, no play? What puts us in that position? What do you think?
Well, for me, it's like I've always believed, and I guess it was a badge of honor. That was like, listen, I will outwork, out hustle anybody. And so that was my validation. That was my reference. That was my stamp of a badge of honor, as I said. So I didn't know any different. And I modeled that behavior. My mum and dad, love them dearly. They worked exceptionally hard. And so that was the reference for how I did things. And Bettina's mum and dad also were exceptionally hardworking people. So that was our default. That was our normal. That's what we knew.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is it's identity. It's like we identify ourselves as grinders and hard workers. So therefore, hard workers we create a story in our heads like hard workers don't take breaks. And we appreciate the grind, especially when we're younger, I find.
Yeah.
And we kind of use that as, like you said, the badge of honor. And then we just kind of, grow with it. Well, welcome back to Wabi Sabi. My goodness, Jim, you and I have been traveling. Well, maybe we can't really say the world anymore because we live in the middle of the world, so we're not traveling very far anymore. Our flights are now down from like 15, 20 hours, 25 hours to now down to like maybe a couple hours, and that's a lot of flight.
Yeah, totally. So tell us, you've just been away and I've been away, so tell yours and I'll tell mine.
Yeah, listen, like we had a what's called Carnival Week over here in Portugal, and we decided to take the family. We're trying to. This is funny, right? So we were thinking like, we're in Europe, it's winter, let's go skiing. And I gotta say, Jim, I don't know if you actually looked into skiing yet, and kids don't ski yet, they haven't done it once. And we looked at all the ski hills. It is too overwhelming to make a decision. There's like, where do you go? France, Italy, Austria, Switzerland. I know people listening are like, "Oh, poor you," but trust me, it is. There are so many options and ski hills that you just go, "This is too hard. This is way too hard to even decide." And that's why we decided. So we didn't go skiing. We went the opposite way. We went for the sun. We went to the Canary Islands and Tenerife to get a little bit more warmer weather during our winters. So that's where we decided to go. What were you?
But you're right though. I'll come back to that in a second. I was just going to say that you're right. And for me, it's gotten to the point where there are so many great spots that it's all recommendations. So I actually said to people, where would you go? Where have you gone? Where could you recommend? And, my son was here just a little while ago. He's now in London. He was with us for a short while. He went over to France and he went skiing and it was brilliant. And the photos, I'm like, oh my gosh, how much snow is there? So it's exactly how he had to go about it as well. It was recommended. I had a week, or the best part of a week in Paris with my lovely wife. We celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. It was scheduled for December. Yeah, and Bettina had been unwell and we rescheduled it to just a couple of weeks ago, so a week and a half ago. So it was awesome. It was great. And it doesn't get old, does it, Laurence? It doesn't get old how close it is, because when you just sound like, I don't know, like it's surreal to go, listen, I'm just heading off to Paris for a few days, and ordinarily a few days would have been a day there, sleep, a day back. There's 3 days gone, 4 days gone, and that's a trip.
Absolutely. Especially when you're listening to like kids in my school, it's like, oh, what are you doing for this break? I'm like, oh, I'm just going to Switzerland. Oh, I'm just going to South Africa. Oh, I'm just going to Paris. It's like, what? Where am I right now?
It's nuts. And we haven't done. So I guess, and that really got us thinking. It wasn't about us flexing about how great are we and how great our holidays, but the theme underneath that was about the importance of breaks and holidays and how important they are, particularly if you are busy living a hectic life, and how do you make space for those? How do you create for those? So let's kick off.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, this has never been about a flex for sure, and it's about I got to be honest with you. Canary Islands. It was like it wasn't. I'm not going back, so it wasn't that exciting. So for those people, no offense to anybody who actually loves the Canary Islands, it's like, I've been there. I'm not going back. So there's plenty more places I would love to go check out. I think there is a rhythm. I definitely, being away with family is an important thing to me, and moving to Portugal sometimes, so you think like, oh, I'm already, and this is where a lot of people kind of you think like, oh, you're in Portugal, like you are in holiday mode. No, like you got to remember, I live here and work here, so it's not like it's a holiday. I remember 20 someone years ago when I moved to Australia, he goes, oh, aren't you so lucky you're in Australia? I go, but I work. It's not like I just like on the beach every day. Yeah, I can be on the beach every day, but it's not like I'm just chilling out, like relaxing in a resort every single day. And so I definitely needed it. I don't know about you, but I definitely needed a bit of reset. And so, let's go back to why we take holidays, why we need to take breaks. I think, we live in a society where everything's moving pretty fast paced. There's a lot of grind, a lot of expectation of ourselves, and a lot of achievements. And we're always trying to push. And one of the things I talk to my clients a lot about, especially at the beginning of the year, was to always kind of set themselves going, all right, one of the most important ways to plan out your year is that you need to plan out your rocks. The rocks are things that they're immovable objects or times and dates or things that are important to you that are really like rigid. They don't change, and you almost got to build your rest of the calendar year based on those rocks and boulders that you decide to set for yourself. And so that could be like, say, your wedding anniversary. It could be like if you celebrate your birthday, for example. But one of those rocks to me is holidays. And people are like, oh yeah, but I'll take holidays when I have a chance. But by the time you think you need a holiday, you're already at a burnout stage for most people. And by the time you actually think about it and then got a plan for it, it's already way too late. And so I always say, like, put the rocks in place in a sense of at least as a temporary date, because you'll be surprised, even though we have 52 weeks in a year, it's amazing that you can fill up that 52 weeks like just by thinking about a certain thing. It goes up pretty fast. So I always say, just make a decision every 3 to 4 months. And I don't know about your Jim, what are your thoughts about that? Every 3 to 4 months is my recommendation. You plan out a week or two, and you put them in blocks, and you pick the dates. I actually get people to pick the dates. It's penciled in. I mean, I'm not asking you to commit to them, but surprisingly, they usually do, taking those dates. But then decide on like, what do you think you're going to do on those dates? Like, are you going to go to Canada? Are you going to go here? Or like, just imagine it. You don't have to, like I said, it's just an imagination. It's just putting it in the calendar. So then all of a sudden you work everything in your life around those rocks. For the years that I've done that, I just feel I am way more productive and reset because I never allow myself to get into too much of a burnt out phase. And I know my rhythm. My rhythm is about 3 months where I sort of need some sort of break or reset. Other people might be different, and that's a lesson that I learned when I was an associate when I first started, because my principal actually forced me to take a holiday. They didn't give me a choice. But yeah, so it was one of those things I've learned. So that's how I do things, and that's, I think, we'll start with the why. That's how I kind of set the calendar. What about you?
Yeah, totally agree, mate. Totally agree. 100%. And that's pretty much everything that you've said. I could actually have just said as well. The importance of regular breaks. Now, my default, I almost had to do it as a measure against me overworking, because that's my default. My default will be I just double down, I'll just go hard. And it was a blind spot that I had for a long time. And I didn't realize that my effectiveness and my efficiency and my capacity was decreasing over time. Even though I was showing up, I wasn't as effective, wasn't as productive. And every time I would go on break. Back in the days when I was in practice, I did exactly the same thing. I would actually schedule it at the start of the year, or just in the last couple of weeks of the year before, we'd go, here's how it has years planned out. It was always easier when there were kids, because you've got school holidays, you've got this, you've got that, and you basically allocate those. And for exactly the right reason, for the same reason that you mentioned, Laurence, in first year, when I first graduated, I literally went 7 days a week for the first 2 years of practice. Yeah. I was that busy. And after about 18 months, I literally wanted to walk away from it. It was just too intense. And it actually fed into the part of me that just went, okay, you just keep going and going and going. And I learned a very powerful lesson that for me, I had to reframe it and realize that it had to be in short spurts. I'm happy to operate at a really high level and an effective level, but the sustainability part of it, I just wasn't nurturing. So consequently, after about 18 months, I was burnt out. I was literally going to go,
let's go into that detail.
Yeah.
I think we should go into that detail, which is like asking the question, like, why do we put ourselves in that position to not take these breaks, all grind, no play? What puts us in that position? What do you think?
Well, for me, it's like I've always believed, and I guess it was a badge of honor. That was like, listen, I will outwork, out hustle anybody. And so that was my validation. That was my reference. That was my stamp of a badge of honor, as I said. So I didn't know any different. And I modeled that behavior. My mum and dad, love them dearly. They worked exceptionally hard. And so that was the reference for how I did things. And Bettina's mum and dad also were exceptionally hardworking people. So that was our default. That was our normal. That's what we knew.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is it's identity. It's like we
Yeah.
identify ourselves as grinders and hard workers. So therefore, hard workers don't. We create a story in our heads like hard workers don't take breaks.
Yeah.
And we appreciate the grind, and we especially when we're younger, I find,
Yeah.
and we kind of use that as like you said, the badge of honor, and then we just kind of grow with it, and so therefore we almost don't want to take any sick days, or we're the type of people who don't take sick days at all. We don't the type of people who don't take any breaks because that's like a sign of weakness that we do. And then I think the other side of things too is we create a story in our head that
Yeah.
we're that important. And
Yeah.
meaning like everybody needs us, whether it be, if you're a doctor, like all my patients need me to be there, otherwise they wouldn't be able to get through whatever. Or if you're like, an accountant, all my clients can't, function without me. Or you go, well, I can never take time off because it's never the right time because there's always something of importance. And I think that's the other side too. We create this story in our head thinking that we're that important that we, the world's going to collapse. Especially your business world's going to collapse if you're not there, and that's a false story that we kind of create.
Yeah,
and
if you build, if you build a whole business around just you, then naturally that's going to come to a head at some point. Where if it's just you and you don't have built systems that leverage your time, effort, energy, and talent, you're going to get to a capacity constraint, and that is you can only physically do what you can do. And when you don't work, you don't. If you're self-employed, for example, you don't get paid. And I think that's the trap for a lot of people who are self-employed, who run businesses, who basically rely on their own personal exertion as a means of generating income. That's where you're not just, like the first thing. I've never had holiday pay. I've never had holiday pay. I've been self-employed from day one. Dot. And so to me, when I first started employing people, I'm like, what? You get like 17.5% holiday. So you're going on holidays and you get an extra, like, what the? And it was a really difficult thing to compute because for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to have 3 weeks off and I'm an associate and I don't get any income in that time. So you learn pretty quickly to associate time off as not getting paid. And you then go either, I've got to learn a way of optimizing that, or I'm just going to keep repeating this habit and I'm going to naturally draw away from holidays so I don't have them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the third thing. That's fear. Is that fear of like, if I go away, the whole thing's going to collapse. Like, what I built up so far, it's going to just collapse in the week I go on holiday or something, forgetting that it took you, several years to kind of get to that position. And then you think that 1 week is going to be like the thing that's going to fall and everything's going to collapse. The whole business is going to like be on fire because you left. And that kind of leads to the process of if you have that type of thinking, you actually end up creating that scenario. Yeah. Meaning, like, if you have it, like you already kind of alluded to it, because if you are self-employed and you are own your own business, you actually, because you're afraid that you think you're so important, then you've actually created a situation where you are needed all the time. Which means that if you almost handcuff yourself to the business and it can't function without you, versus if you actually took the time to going, okay, how do I create a business where I can take 4 to 6 weeks off, right? And then all of a sudden now, with that type of thinking, you're building that business knowing that you're going to take 6 weeks off a year. And then therefore you got to work around it. Just like I said to you about planning your holidays ahead, like you got to go, these are the days I'm going to take. And then all of a sudden everything kind of works around it. Like you figure a way out somehow. And the same thing around the holiday part where they just feel like I can't take off. I can't just like, people need me or I won't get paid, right? The holiday pay. I've never gotten holiday pay either. And it's like, how I think about it is like, okay, if I just say, let's just put a random figure. I want to earn, $150,000. You got to think like, I want to earn $150,000 not in 52 weeks, right?
Yeah.
That's bad math because then you're never going to achieve it. I want to earn $150,000 in 46 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. So now then you go, that's my target now per week. So that's how I'm going to figure it out because you already budgeted for the 6 weeks off. And I think because now it pushes your goals up a bit in terms of what you need to achieve, but you've already budgeted for that 6 week holiday.
Yeah, totally. And I learned this lesson when I used to practice in country New South Wales. We practiced in Darwin originally when I first started, but then we practiced in country New South Wales, and there were a lot of farming communities there. And so fundamentally what they would have is they'd have 1 year that was an extraordinary year for crop, and that may be followed by 1 or 2 or 3 year lean years, for example. And so consequently what they would do is to even out and smooth out their payment cycles. The year that they had a really huge crop, they didn't go out there and overcommit and overbuy. They basically had things in the buffer and as a reserve to smooth out the cycles because they knew that winter will come and it will come every year. And they had to make allowances for that. So fundamentally, I learned good farm management, i.e. extended to good life and business management for a sustainable model. And so that really shaped how I started looking at things and effectively, and then you basically said, because the linearity model was always like a reward, basically a pay per time model. And that's a really important one. If you actually want to have the freedom that you're talking about, Laurence, you've got to be able to smash that time money relationship and look at ways of leveraging and doing what you just said is like, how can I create a yearly income? Some people do it in one event. Some people will do it over a month and they earn their year's basically income in a month. And for the rest of the 11 months, and that takes a little bit getting used to if that's not how your model of income is generated. But there are people out there who may earn an income every 2 years, every 6 months, every 3 months, but they've found ways of making that sustainable and having their breaks along the way as well.
Yeah, you got to budget for it, and you got to have a long time planning. And if you've been in business long enough, you have predictable trends. Right? Yeah. So if you're in a retail business, for example, like you got to know, like you can't be having an average monthly target of like say $10,000 a month or something, but knowing that Christmas and maybe Christmas months are 3 times the amount coming in, and you got to know like maybe February is a very terrible month. So you can't, you got to make sure you budget for the trends, especially when if your business is cyclical in those type of trends. In the practice model, for example, in the doctor's model, April in Australia is always a terrible month because typically you have 3 public holidays and, you got, the 2 Easter Monday, Easter Good Friday, and plus you got Anzac Day in there, and so it's not, I always tell people, it's like, people, oh, December's such a slow month. It's not like you didn't know that. It's not like Christmas lands on a different day every year. You know what I mean? And it's like, you just got to budget for that. You got to plan for it. If you know December is going to be, traditionally in your practice or in your business, December is a slow month, then maybe ramp up some stuff going in September, October, November to make sure it buffers for that, And I think that's such an important thing. It's just about planning, and but we repeat these cycles and we never think about them for some reason.
And because they are fear based, you're right. It's very uncommon for have someone who hasn't planned for that to suddenly plan. Here's the thing that I always used to find was a challenge because leading up to Christmas, interestingly, particularly in country New South Wales, was an exceptionally busy time. It was our busiest time of the year. Because people would come out from regional towns, they'd do all their central shopping in the major city, and the lead up to Christmas was insane. And then it would drop off over in January. So, but what's happening is, you mentioned about self-employed people, particularly in Australia, you would have people who would have variable income going into Christmas, which traditionally was a high expense time. Then they'd have January, which would really quiet. And then you'd challenge them, okay, you need to plan for your holidays. And you're like, yeah, man, but my income's dried up. So there was the fear around that. And what was really helpful was acknowledging, as you just said, that there are going to be cycles, there are trends. But then also, in order for you to basically hit the ground running in March or June when things are a lot busier, you have to build in measures so that you're on your A game when the A game requirements come across. There's no
perfect
point
example. The perfect example would be, I don't know if it's happening in your neighborhood, but here in Portugal, January, man, the amount of restaurants are just closed,
Yeah.
gone for a week or two. And they just like I'm like, what happened? Like, did they go out of business? No, they just taking their 2 weeks off, because in a restaurant business, in the middle of winter in our area, it's like it's not the prime time. Like, they know they need to be well rested, prepared for July and August when it's tourists and people coming in. Like, they're going to be rammed, and they got to take some time off, and so they can't do it during those times when everybody else is taking it, because they're in that market where they're serving people who are on holidays. I was just thinking about like asking the next question, which is, when you plan your holiday, what do you do to plan your holiday? And what are some of the things that, you do, or how do you think about the process? Because it might be different for everybody else.
Okay. All right. So it was a good rule of thumb that I learnt along the way was, if you live a relatively sedentary, non-challenging life, and so if you're doing mainly administrative type work, a lot of people are drawn to adventure-based type holidays where they're scaling mountains, they're doing a whole lot of things. If you're running a life that's really intense and hectic and busy and go and grind, to counter that, you quite often will feel gravitated towards holidays that are a lot more resting, so more beach-based and stuff. And at different times of my life, I crave different things. So the beach to me is like one of my favorite places in the world. So I would always gravitate towards the beach. But depending on how exhausted, mentally tired I was, I'd have a certain amount of time that I could do that for. Like, I love the beach, but being on there for 2 weeks straight, after a while I'd get bored. So I had to find adventures. I had to find things that were important. And interestingly, when our kids were young, when they were very young, we tended to go to places that were more resort-based, more kids club things, so that the kids had fun. Bettina and I had some time away, and that was really helpful. But as they got older, we started incorporating the kids into particular adventures and say, where would you like to go? Where would you like to do? What would you like to see? And, the first time we went to America with the kids, it was awesome because we actually had this basically opportunity. It was like blank canvas. I said, what would you like to do? And Xavier, my youngest, said, I want to go to Disneyland. We go, great, awesome. Bettina said, I want to go and do a tour of the Grand Canyon. I want to do a helicopter ride in the Grand Canyon. And so we penciled that in. I wanted to go to New York. And so we did all of those so that everybody got a part of it. And to this day, Bettina still believes that the helicopter ride, which was awesome, by the way, through the Grand Canyon was the best part of that holiday. And I agree. But we got to experience the things that we all wanted to have individually, but also as a group, to get to share what others wanted to do as well.
Yeah, that helicopter ride in Grand Canyon is pretty beautiful. I did that with my friend Nick, and it's special for sure. I think based on what you said, like basically if you kind of dissect it, really, it's based on values, and I think it's based on values and also what's required. What you having a self-awareness. I think it's two things: self-awareness of yourself, that what you need the most, have an assessment of your personality and what you need to kind of unwind and what you need that break for, and having an intention around that. And number two is the values, and values meaning like, I think how I look at values is this: is you got to know yourself well enough through the self-evaluation that what are some of the things that make you excited? Like what makes you excited and what makes you happy and bring joy to your life? And I don't know about you, Jim. I'm sure this is going to be the same for you, but what brings joy to my life is very, very different to what brings Karen joy and what brings Kaya and Christian. And the hard part about families is that you got to have to figure out like some compromise that, that's great what you did with the US trip. We did something very similar. Is every time we go away, I tend to go, okay, what's one thing you would like to do on this trip, wherever we're going, that you would like to do? And we could try to make that, make sure we try to tick that off so that at least there was that one thing we all each of us kind of felt that it was picked because of what we wanted to do and no questions asked. And we've done that before. And I think that's great because it just highlights that everybody will get something out of it. And that's based on your, personality. Like for me, it's always about variety. I love and food actually. So I really love making sure I at least, have one or two really good food restaurants that I like. And, my kids and my wife, they don't really like the foods that I have, but I always try to want to feel like I just need one. Just give me at least one. I can't go 7 days without having one good meal. So I want to make sure and also variety, meaning like I want to do something that I've never done before or go to a place that I've never done before. Hence, like, I think that's important. where some people don't need that. They want the comfort of having the knowledge and the confidence that where they're going, they know what they're going to expect, which means that they
Yeah.
might go back to the same place,
Yeah.
same hotels, same restaurants, and that's if that's what you need to feel joy in your life, then that's awesome. And that's, I feel like we got to plan our breaks accordingly to those values.
Yeah, totally. And it's actually really interesting things that would happen because depending on how tired you are and depending how tired I was when I'd go on a break, that first week was really just fatigue. I was like, I didn't realize how tired I was. Like the day before, I'm gunning and firing. The next day, I can't keep my eyes open past 8 o'clock. It was the permission to just let go, to unwind. And a really interesting thing would happen. Like for me, I would love just spending time in the water, in the beach. You know, I'd be there and I'd be coming out and I'm all wrinkly and after having spent way too long in the water. But that to me, that was like a refuge. I felt fantastic. And it was one of the only places where I could actually surrender. I really felt that there's two places, interestingly for me, that I get exceptionally present, and that is in the waves and not in jiu-jitsu, because I can't think about anything else. Right. And I have to be present. So to me, every holiday, like you said, was value-based. So that was really important. But a really interesting thing would happen is that after like the initial fatigue would go, then I'd start, it's almost like my brain was going, okay, you've been in survival mode for the last X amount of time. Now that you've recharged, opportunities and ideas start coming into you. So I'd go for a run and I would come back. I'd get up in the morning, go for a run, come back. And Bettina got to the point where she was like, oh my God, here he comes again. I'd say, hey, Hannah, I was thinking about this. I had this idea. She's like, okay, here we go. Because it got to the point where I couldn't get the ideas out of my head fast enough. So I'd have to start writing them down. And that was what, to me, holidays created for me, was recharging and an opportunity to go meta on myself rather than just being stuck in the day-to-day. And as well as obviously connecting with time with family, which sometimes in the early years of building a business, I had less time there than I wanted to with the kids.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I try to always challenge, people, especially clients, to, when they take their break, doesn't have to be long. It's not the length of time that matters, but I think it's about the change of scenery. And, for me, I find that, and again, this is my value, so I don't want to impose my values on anybody else, but for me going to a different place that inspires me, or some place I've never been, it creates a contrast in my life and in my thinking as well. I think a lot of times, one of the reasons why I feel like if you're an entrepreneur or if you're a business owner, I think it's really important for you to take that time once in a while. It's purely because if you're in the same city, in the same job, in the same bed, and the same kind of like routine, which I highly recommend with routines, but the problem with those routines, though, you do get into this Groundhog Day moment. Yeah. And that doesn't allow you to be creative because you have no perspective, right? Yeah. So on one hand, being disciplined and having systems and having a routine is such an important element to succeed in life. It's really important to make sure you schedule a break in those routine once in a while so that you can actually have the perspective that you need to gain new insights, new perspective, to create new ideas, to challenge yourself, to ask yourself, is the business model that I'm working with right now still current and active and in line to what I want to achieve?
Yeah.
Right? And that's why I think a lot of us, like you and I, have moved countries in the last year because that break in routine happened, and it's like, oh, wait a second, our train was moving one way, and we realized we had to stop because it was an emergency, and we had to come off the train. And then you start to realize, look around and going, actually, do I still want to be on this train, and do I still want to go in that direction? Right. And then we just, both of us decided to hop on another train. Right. So, and that's, sometimes you need that. But if you don't take that break, you're not going to know, because you're so in the train and you're just in that fast pace, and you never even look out the window to see if this is where I still want to go. Yeah.
Beautifully put, actually. And, last week while we were in Paris, here's the thing like that I took out of that. We were in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And what was amazing about that, as well as obviously celebrating an anniversary, was walking around such beautiful monuments and such beautiful buildings that it actually made me stop and go, a lot of the times you get hung up on my own stuff. And, realizing how insignificant in the grand scheme of things quite often that is. So when you look at things that have stood the test of time over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and there's beauty and awe, it elevates you, but then also makes you realize, wow, I need to elevate. I need to think bigger. I need to look at the art, look at the inspiration that I can draw from those things. So to me, it just opens up my brain, my synapses, my connections. I see links between things that I may not have seen before. And the same thing about routines. Like we had a deal, Batir and I. Okay, we're going to Paris. I'm having croissants. There are a couple of bets that are going off. I'm just gonna, not that I'll go crazy with my diet, but I'm not going to go to Paris where some of the best food in the world will be and be that bloke who makes a big issue about it. So I just surrendered to it. Ate some incredible food. I had more carbs and pastries than I have for a long time. I felt rubbish for it, but I was okay with that because I came back this week and I'm back in my routine and I had the contrast. And that was really important for me mentally to just let that go.
Yeah, I think so too. Like, I think it's such an important thing. And it's funny. I have the same kind of feeling when it comes to like these old places. And that's why I think we love about Europe, because it's so old. It's like centuries old, like back to the 1200s. And I don't know if you have the same thing. I have this weird thing. So when we go up to, like, I don't know, let's just say, you were here in Portugal and we were going up the fort, for example, the castle. And, I would walk up these castle and, it's been standing there since like the 1250s or something, and you look around and like, man, like the world that they were living in. And when I'm in those places, I have a tendency of just touching the walls.
I do the same. I do the same.
Do you? Okay, exactly.
Yeah,
it's
100%.
Weird, right? Okay. I just do it because I'm like, this has been here for like 800 years, and I feel like, even though thousands of millions of people have touched this thing, but I feel like I'm touching this and like I'm getting a sense of like those people at that time. And like it does two things. Like, one, like, man, what does it take to have lasted this long, right, to the test of time? But two, it's like, wow, my life is so insignificant. So all my problems, no one's going to care. No one's going to know who I am, in 50 years, let alone like, 400 years. Like it doesn't matter. I'm like, all those big things I think it's like such a big issue. It's like, like it's big to me right now, but is it really that big like in 30 years time? And that's sort of that presence of that contrast. I think sometimes we need to kind of be humble. I think it's humbling ourselves to recognize that our problems are not that big of a problem.
Totally agree. We do need that humbling to come on board. Yeah, totally. And in addition to the touching, I always, like, if I see these worn cobblestones, what goes through my mind is who has walked along here? How many people have walked on? What history has happened? What, all those kind of things, and that becomes an adventure in there as well. And I do think that doesn't have to be on the other side of the world. It can be 50 kilometers away from your home. This weekend, Bettina and I are heading out to a seaside place here, just looking for some venues for some events. And there's an adventure around that. It's going to be a day, overnight stay. Those kind of things break you out of the habit of being yourself, which allows you to then come back to whatever you're doing with a sense of energy, vigor, vitality, because you've had the contrast and you go, yes, I choose this again, and I'm bringing a recharged, revitalized, energized version of myself back to take it on.
Well, it's going to do two things, right? So like when you go and discover something, it's either going to do one or two things, and both of them will actually be helpful. One, it's going to create enough contrast to going, you know what? It proves that what I'm doing right now is what I want to do, right?
Yeah.
Because if, for example, it might just reinforce the fact that what I'm like, for example, the croissants. I mean, let's say croissants are amazing, right? The French food, amazing. Those desserts, the pastry is amazing. Yeah. But you've said like it was amazing in the moment, but it feels terrible when you eat too much of it. And so the contrast there is like, I love it, but I also know that if I ate a diet of that every single day on my daily routine, that would suck. I don't want to feel like this all the time. I feel like this for a couple of days, it's fine. But if I don't want to feel like this, so it's like reinforcement of the things what you do and what you eat and what you don't eat. It's like, no, this is why I do this, right? So once in a while I can do that. So it's either that, or two, you go, I actually felt really good, or I like really enjoyed that part of the world, or maybe I should change. So it may force you to change instead of reinforce. So either way, it's a good thing because it makes you get better. It makes
Yeah,
you be a better person, and it makes you more aware of who you are, what you like, what you don't like, and what you love, what you distaste, and it really kind of creates this contrast that allows you to become a human being. And let's face it, at the end of your life, you're going to be more refined because you took chances to help you try to find what's the best thing that brings you more joy into your world.
totally, totally. And I want to share a funny scenario because we initially tried. So I don't have dairy, wheat, sugar as a normal part of my diet. But we went into places and we'd say, listen, is there, with this, Bettina wanted to order a coffee, and it was like, do you have almond tea? And they're like, no. There was almost offence to the French. It's like, I'm offended that you would even consider putting almond milk in a coffee. So it's like, no, we have it. There's just one type of milk, and that's all you got. And you have a choice whether you want to be part of that or not. But it was really, really funny. So that was the anecdote that we took out of that in there. And you get to choose. You get to choose your own adventure and have a lot of fun along the way. But that had us in stitches when we couldn't get anybody to agree. And you think, am I being too high maintenance? If I'm doing it there, where else am I? So I take that as a coachable moment, and then I've gone, no. I actually don't feel great when I have it. That's the reason why. But yeah, that was a funny experience.
Can you imagine like going to get a coffee and it's like, yes, I want that uncaffeinated, organic, plant-based milk
Yeah.
latte, please. Yeah.
That's it. And we would joke. I always joke because Bettina would have every variation that you could possibly have. Loves the taste of it, and the smell, but couldn't tolerate aspects of it. And she would get some really funny looks, and it'd be like, "What? I didn't even know it was a thing. I didn't know you could incorporate those kind of things." You learn that. You realize what is a really important thing in one part of the world is a no big deal, and then sometimes a really big deal that you didn't even realize. You can then take that idea. How many business ideas have started in your native country from someone who traveled and went, what a great idea, I should do that here. And
Yeah.
that's the other advantage, right?
Well, I think that's exactly why you want to take breaks, because you start to discover different cultures. You start to realize what's important to one culture isn't important to another. Like, I don't know about you in Spain, but actually, I imagine you would be in Spain. It's very similar to that because you have that siesta that most people don't have. And it's like, for me as a tourist, it's a freaking most annoying thing in the world that shops close for 3 hours in the middle of the day. I just don't understand it. But as the culture in Spain, like that's part of what they do. And I feel like when I moved to Portugal, like the pace here is definitely a lot more slower. It's more relaxed, and they're more family focused. Like they work long hours, but it's like, don't bother us on weekends because that's family time. And whereas in Australia, like I the culture underlying here is like, I wouldn't call anybody or dare to text anybody from a business perspective on the weekends here. Just because it's like, you got to respect the family time because they're not going to get back to you anyways. And so like, there's just that cultural difference. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, good or bad. I'm just, what I'm saying is that trying on a different culture and respecting it has that contrast that you kind of sometimes need to realize, like, maybe I'm just working way too hard. Maybe I'm moving too fast. Maybe I can learn a little bit of just slowing down and appreciating the food. I mean, one of the things that contrast I never thought about, because I don't drink anyways, but someone told me in Portugal, like, there are no bars here. Like, not many bars. There's not many pubs. Whereas like in Australia and England, like it is everywhere, right? In Europe, there are not many pubs. Why? Because they don't drink socially just for drinking's sake. Most of the time they drink with food and and with people, and they drink with their dinner. That's why their dinner, when you go to a restaurant, if you book like 7 o'clock, they expect you to be there till 10 or 11 o'clock. There's no like turnovers like like they do in most Western kind of cultures, like in Australia or England. Like they want you to get out of there within an hour and a half so I can get the turn. They drink with the meals, and they expect you to be there for several courses, and especially in Southern Europe. And so I think like understanding that culture is to go, maybe I can embrace a little bit of that. Maybe I can actually take on some of that too, because maybe what would my life look like if I did some of those things? And that's the advantage here of traveling. Traveling and taking those breaks is be able to get that contrast you need to break away your current cycle.
Yeah, you're right. And I always it's funny, because when you are in it and when you are back from it, you can see the magic and the beauty of it. But a lot of the time, there has to be a discipline and a routine about planning it in advance, like you said very early on. Otherwise, you don't get to do it. Even though you know that you benefit, even though you know it's great for you, even though, and I always found this as well too, Lawrence, I'm not sure if that was used, the version of me that came back was so much more energized and inspired that we would generate our revenues would basically increase significantly to counter whatever amount of time we had off anyway. And interestingly, the year that I did my coach training, my accreditation, I was out of the office for 6 weeks doing my training, and that was back in the day where we didn't have an associate either. It was Bettina and I. So we was like, we were out, we shut for 6 weeks, we had our holidays, and we also went to America at the end of the year. And that was the year we had our biggest turnover up until that point that year. And it really, yeah, and like I could have been sucked into thinking, okay, you've been out of your office for 6 weeks because you've been doing this program, but it wasn't really a holiday because it was like studying, immersion, doing all our work to get our accreditation in coaching. But we still took a break on top of that, and yet that still ended up being the busiest year by revenue that we'd had up until that point in time. And it showed me the power of focus. It showed me the power of concentrated effort, and basically say, I'm going to be here for the next 3 weeks. I'm going to basically put all of myself into this, and then I'm going to be away. And there's something about immersing yourself rather than just coasting.
I think it's that planning and positioning and budgeting for it accordingly, and your body, like the universe, I think, and how you operate will budget for the rest of it, as long as they are important to you. And I think the other thing too, as well, as we kind of talk about that, which is, I feel like we got to recognize sort of where does those breaks need to happen. We already talked about, like, from the timing perspective, what kind of breaks you're going to need to have. We talked about that. Designing those breaks, we kind of talked about that. And I think one of the most important things is to recognize, like, you got to really start dreaming about it too. I guess that's where I want to go with this, is like, there might be things that you might not be doing this year, but you want to plan ahead in the future. And where would I like to go? What are some of the top places I've always wanted to visit? And then start, like, really put that in your brain to really start to go, I want to imagine on a bucket list, I would like to go to one of these places one day. And then as soon as you write it down or put it down somewhere, you will kind of make that happen because it's in your brain now. Right. It's in the process. And I think that's really important. Like, I remember I've been thinking to myself for a long time that I'll love to live in Europe at some point in my life. Here I am. Right. So, I mean, I didn't know how, I don't know when. I just, just put in there. And when I was in school in Canada, I wrote down, this is funny, like, I don't know if I told you this, but I wrote down in my, when we just do some dreaming and stuff, when my friend Jamie and Scott, we used to write down at lunchtime, we just like do this mastermind every week, and we wrote down like our dream practice and our dream life. And I wrote down, this is what I wrote down. I worked 3 days a week. I would see this amount of patients, and my practice would be right on the water in the ocean. Yeah. I was in Canada. There are no oceans. I was in Toronto, at least. I wasn't in Vancouver. I wasn't in the East Coast. There was no ocean. But somehow, 2 years later, I ended up in Australia. Yeah, I had no thoughts about going to Australia at that time.
Yeah.
And, like, it's amazing. I'm not saying just like wish it and it will come. I'm not saying this at all. What I'm saying is, like, you got to put these seeds in your brain to go, like, what do I want? And then start thinking about, how can I achieve that? Like, what do I need to do? Or what do I need to start doing to kind of to even have a chance of wanting to go to these places? Or, and why is that such an important thing to me? And then some budget accordingly and seeding the mind. And I think that's really powerful based on what you just sort of said too.
Yeah, it really hit home too about actually taking steps to manifest those, to fulfill those visions and those dreams as well. Because my son was on a plane flight he was flying from Australia to Paris. Must have been a few weeks ago, probably 2 months ago. And on the plane, there was a lady. She would have been in her 70s, and the hostess is just talking to her, and she said, "Oh, you're heading off. Have you been to Paris before?" She says, "No." my TED, and I always planned on going. And then the hostess is looking around, and she said, "Well, Ted never made it." So she was going to fulfill, and apparently our son was talking around and going, the whole cabin area was just in tears. They were crying about this woman who was doing this trip on herself by herself, a trip that she and her husband always wanted to, but for one reason or another never did. And I think for me, holidays have taken a different meaning because before they were a break from my day to day, which allowed me to go back and do that. So they've taken a different meaning now for me because to me the breaks are linked about adventure, and I want to see things. I want to optimize the time I have available to get to see all the things that I've wanted to see and do and experience those things. So for me, there's an appreciation that's come through travel as well
Yeah.
that I just love. I love who I am. I love expanding my capacity, my awareness around things. I love learning new things. So holidays have taken a little bit more of a different meaning for me now than they did 10 years ago.
You're right. And I just want to address that because I think it's such an important thing to, I hear so many people, I wish I could have done that. I, really wanted to do that. And, the question is when,
Yeah.
and it's never the right time.
Yeah.
And I think this is what I want to lead into, which I wanted to say before, which is limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
Like we create these limiting beliefs in our heads. We can't do that because of X. And because you start the brain thinking of what you can't do versus going, well, what could I do? What is possible for me to accomplish? What would it take for me to go to Paris? What would it take for me to go to Australia? What would it take to go wherever? I just find that that's a really important question to ask versus about like, oh, I can never do that. Well, never is a long time. And I think everything is possible. And, one of those things is that it's funny because I lived in Australia for 20 years and the amount of times that, some of the friends I had in Canada would say, oh yeah, I'm going to come and visit you. 20 years gone by, no one came.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
and then I'm no longer there. So
Yeah.
like, you're definitely not coming,
Yeah.
like my brother never,
Yeah.
never made it. No offense to my brother. I'm not asking him to come, but he never made it to Australia.
Yeah.
Right. I was there for 20 years. My parents lived there for 10.
Yeah.
And, he never made it. And I could, for obvious reasons, it's far, whatever. It's far. It's, he's a teacher. So it's hard to kind of come in certain time. But at the end of the day, it's like, you can go now, but I'm not there. So, I can't show you around. Like, and have to do it on your own. So like, there's this, but we have these limiting beliefs, right? Like we can't do this because of X. And so the challenge here really is to kind of think about like, what are some of the limiting beliefs we have in our mind of why we can't do. We talked about some of them, like, oh, I can't do this because my practice needs me, or I can't do this because my business needs me. The business can't run by itself. And these are just limiting beliefs that we talk about. I can never take 6 weeks off.
Yeah.
I remember I have one of my clients, who we both know, like, a few years ago, he said, like, Laurence, I would really love to take 10 weeks off to go travel around Australia.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, let's make that happen. Now, he didn't tell me like, I want to take it off like next week or next month.
Yeah.
No, we had like 6 months or more to plan to make sure they go, okay, let's figure this out. Like, how do we logistically make the business be in a position? And then like 2 years later, he goes, I'm going to take 6 months off. I'm like, okay. Right. Like, so let's how to make this work. How are we going to make sure that this, because six months is a bit different than 10 weeks, but like we've done it once, so we can figure this out. Like, how do we do that? And he did a great job. Like he just got back from his things that did everything go to plan. Oh yeah. Accordingly, but certain things we expected and some things we didn't expect. But the whole idea is like, you got to put it out there and you got to take the action. But what's the worst? Now it's like, nothing collapsed. Like, sure, certain things didn't go as well, but you know what? You can rescue it back. And that's the thing. We hold ourselves back. And the thing is, the missed opportunity though, opportunity is you miss it and you regret it. And that's the pain. The pain for me is the regret.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And you know what? Stuff's going to happen. It's life. Nothing's always going to go to plan. It's like, okay, adapt, innovate, overcome, get through that. And it really hit home for me too, because when this was the first time I'd actually been to Paris, and what took me so long to get there was I always had this idea in my mind. When I get to Paris, I built it up as hey, I want it to be awesome and it'll be great and whatever, and it was. My brother had been to Paris several times, And he's going, mate, you've got to come. You've got to come. I go, yeah, I will come when I could. And I just waited too long. And I deprived myself of the beauty of a wonderful city, all the great things that I took out of it, purely because I had a idea or a narrative around how it needed to be in order for me to do that. And I kind of, a lot of us kind of get in our own way sometimes. And there's certain things that I don't, but that one I have to take ownership on and say, I waited way too long to get to that place because I wanted it to be perfect in my mind. And I'd go to other places. I did all these other things. I'd love adventure, but I didn't do the one that I really wanted to do because I wanted it to be a certain way.
You there? I think I just cut out there for a second.
Yeah.
Oh, I think what I heard from you was like, you missed out. You kind of delayed this, and it's funny. When I first moved to Australia, I see, and that's will affect a lot of people, I think, because you're so used to this. We never really travel in our hometown or our home country sometimes because we know it's always there. It's always that. Well, we'll get to it at some point. And I remember going to Australia the first time 20 years ago, and people goes, "Oh, where are you from?" I'm like, "I'm from Canada." He goes, "Oh, I love Canada." He goes, "Oh, where you been?" He goes, "Yeah, I love Vancouver." And like the amount of people that have been to Vancouver, like because obviously it's closer. It's ridiculous. Oh, I love the skiing there. I love that. And I gotta say, my whole I was probably 28 at the time. 28 years. I've never been to Vancouver my whole life.
Yeah.
It's like I lived in that country. I'm like, I'll get to it someday. Yeah. And I've never been. Been. I was like, and then I remember one of the first flights I went back to Canada. I said to Karen, I'm like, okay, this is getting a little bit ridiculous. Where we're Canadians and we've never been to where most Aussies have been and lived in. We have to stop over in Vancouver to say, like, at least we've been to Vancouver, And it's funny that, and if you look, I guarantee this is the same thing for most people's life. It's like you typically won't travel or see the things that you feel like you can just do it at any moment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you'll go as far to the end of the world sometimes to go see something else, but you don't. And it's the same thing, right? For me, when I come over here and people find out we're from Australia, it's like, Australia. It's like, wow. Like, you came all the way from Australia. Like, why would you leave that place? Because, because for them, it's like this magical place. I'm like, for me, it was home for 20 years. I mean, beautiful. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I love Australia. Amazing beaches, amazing people, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, I've done it. Yeah. Like, what I mean? So it's like, for them, it's a dream. For me, it's like, it's where I live. And I'm sure Australians who travel feel exactly the same thing. Same thing for me as being Canadian. It's like, everybody loves Canada. I'm like, done it. Like I lived there for most of my life. It's like, it's that thing. I think sometimes we always going after something that's different, which is what we're talking about. Like, you got to challenge yourself. I mean, people in Paris, they're probably going like, why do you want to come to Paris? It's beautiful.
Everybody was saying, Australia, well, I want to get there. So like, but you don't understand. So it's sometimes it's a perception of the grass is always greener on the other side. And sometimes it is. And you don't know until you go and check it out. So Laurence, I think that we've highlighted, I guess, the need for why breaks are important. We've highlighted the need for, I guess, what different types of holidays they are. We've highlighted what quite often stops people from doing that. I thought perhaps as we start closing out on our episode today, we might talk about, highlight three things specifically. What our favourite holiday destination may have been.
I was going to ask the same question.
Well, yeah, okay.
Nice.
This is like, so what our favourite destination is, what's our biggest learning, and where's the next spot we want to go and visit. So how about you start, and then I literally gave myself like 10 seconds head start on communicating it to you. So
okay, favorite first question. Favorite destination I've ever been to? Oh man, that's a tough one. Okay, favorite destination so far. Oh, I've met so many to choose from, but I would pick. I really enjoyed my European trip. I'm gonna make a European trip rather than like I'm gonna pick a whole bunch of cities. Just because I'll tell you why. I'll make this really short. I know it's boring, but I took my kids about 4 years ago to Europe, and we did 3 days in every single city. We went from England to Paris to Nice to Venice to Florence, and that took a whole entire month. And we did 3 days in each city. It was like 2 full days of each city and 1 day to travel. 2 full days, and it was one of the most magical experiences. I really loved Venice. It was magical. I felt something was just magical there. Some people hate it. Some people love it, but for me, I loved it. I loved just getting lost in the city in Venice and traveling. And this is one of those things. Is like I recognize that if you go to Venice, if you find something you really like in a store, go buy it, because you're never going to find that freaking store again. it's because it's just like such a windy thing, and you can get lost. And I love getting lost in Venice. I didn't, really with the no Google Maps and stuff. I just love that place. So that was for me. What about you?
I loved my favorite place. Interestingly, in contrast, was both Fiji and New York. They've been my favorite. I love Paris. Don't get me wrong, that was awesome. But for the contrasts, I love it. I love the culture of Fiji and the experience. And perhaps one time when we've got a chance, I've got to share some of the funniest learnings. The best learnings I've ever had in my life. In some of the trips that I've had there. So Fiji and New York have been probably my favorite.
Okay. I just brought me some memories of Japan. I was only there for 2 days, but I freaking loved it. But okay. Go on. What was the second question?
Biggest learning through travel?
Biggest learning from travel? For me, how much I love traveling.
Yep.
I just love culture. I just love the different cultures. I love, I love being on planes. I love just being by myself, and even whether be traveling by myself or traveling with family, I just love being on planes. I love trying out new foods, new restaurants, and it juices me up just to kind of like do something different that I cannot do tomorrow.
Yep, I'd probably be exactly the same. So let's go. We're 100% match on that one. So question number 3, next.
Well, it's kind of unfair because I already know what my next holidays are going to be. Okay. Well, I'm going to be on a Croatia. Croatia was one. I'm going to be on a super yacht with a bunch of friends, and that's going to be one. But I'll actually, one of the places I've always wanted to visit, I haven't got a chance to yet. Maybe I'm waiting for the perfect moment. I'm not sure. Iceland. I've always wanted to go to Iceland. I always want to go to see the Northern Lights.
Yep.
I hate the cold, but somehow something that's drawing me to go to Iceland. It's been on my bucket list for years. When you're mentioning about like regrets and stuff, I don't know why. It's been always been so far and stuff, but now I'm a little closer. I just got to convince the right people to want to go there with me.
Yeah, I like it. And if it wasn't for a competing another event, I probably would have been joining you in Croatia there, yes. Laurence. But for me, the place that I want to get to is Prague. I've never been to Prague, and I'm fascinated by the architecture and the history, and it's always been a place that I've always wanted to visit just purely for the beauty of the place, and one of the only places that was preserved during the World Wars and it was never bombed. So always had a fascination about it. There's so many places in the world, there's so many beautiful, but that's the one I've always wanted to visit. I'm really curious about its history and its architecture.
Fantastic. Well, guys, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you take the most important thing I think Jim and I would love for you to do right now is actually go plan like your next 2 or 3 holidays in the next 12 months and go, where would they be, what would it look like, and when would you do it, and put that on a calendar and talk to your significant others and your family and say, like, can we make this happen? What does that look like? And just dream and just see where that takes you. I hope that you enjoyed this podcast and share this with other people, because I feel like the more people are actually being a better version of themselves, I think the world needs that, and the world will be that much better. And if you're on YouTube or if you're on Facebook or wherever you're watching this, and you get a chance to maybe comment on maybe what is your favorite holiday destination, or maybe where you would like to go, it will give us some ideas maybe for us to kind of go travel there too. So I'd love to hear some of your insights too. Until next week, this is Wabi Sabi. This is me and Jim sharing our insights around life, and I hope that you get to live your life full of imperfections as well. Talk to you soon.